Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the theories of romantic relationships. This is one of the major components of the paper 3, and even though it says theories of romantic relationships, they could still ask you about one individually. And this is the third one out of 4. And it's a fairly straightforward concept of having investment, this idea that certain relationships may kind of have a certain levels of commitment based on the fact that they are because there's a lot more commitment than not. Okay, so let's have a look at it. This is also a model that pretty much kind of comes from equity, comes from social exchange, talks about kind of how people potentially persist in a relationship compared to others because of how people may be invested in terms of the relationship. And it says here builds upon social exchange. So it's still using this idea of maximizing reward, minimizing cost, possibly using some elements of comparison levels in order to kind of find out what my alternatives are, and then kind of adding this extra kind of layer of investment, and then ultimately kind of using this term commitment, saying that people are committed if they kind of have kind of combination that kind of works together. So it's not it's using some elements of social exchange and then adding its own to kind of get to where it is. Now, of course, the commitment in itself is the thing that is worth kind of noting. If you've done the addiction topic, it would be similar to the TPB model, where we kind of measure our level of commitment. Okay, so level of commitment, we measure it based on our satisfaction, based on our alternatives, and also then the third component, of course, is going to be about investment. And then we potentially work out whether the relationship is worthwhile based on these kind of 3 factors, to decide whether we potentially are going to continue with the relationship. And so it says here, and their investment against the rewards offered. So it kind of, that's why kind of it's called risk-based investment model, but it's kind of talking about kind of commitment. Another way you can view this is to kind of have a look at a diagram that pretty much kind of highlights the 3 aspects of it. The third aspect is the only one that's new. So we've done social comparisons in terms of rewards and cost. We've done kind of comparison levels of alternatives, and now we have this investment. So how much have we invested into the relationship? Okay, so let's look at that diagram I was talking about. So we have these three factors: satisfaction, alternatives, and investment, and this ultimately determines whether our commitments are high or whether our commitment is low. Okay, and so if we have obviously high commitment, then of course we're going to stay in the relationship, and if we have low commitment, we're going to obviously leave the relationship. So let's quickly just break that down. So satisfaction is nothing kind of new. We look at social exchange as your positives and your negatives, and ultimately like the extent to which you're fulfilled. I quite like this idea that your needs are fulfilled by your partner. So in other words, it is looking at kind of reward and cost in terms of kind of the actual relationship and your needs in terms of that. And once again, it's whether your needs can be fulfilled outside the relationship or in the current relationship. So if you have few alternatives or many alternatives, it could kind of influence your ultimate decision as to whether you're committed or not. But then it does talk about investment being a big part of this. It's called the risk-based investment model. So we have intrinsic and extrinsic. Now, this could be confusing in terms of kind of what the different things are, but intrinsic is within the relationship and extrinsic is outside of the relationship. But of course, the distinction themselves could well be quite interesting to us. We see intrinsic here, kind of talking about things that you brought towards the relationship, worked on together. So you can use things like your disclosure model in terms of factors affecting attraction, how much you've actually spent in terms of disclosing, but also it does say about time, gifts, and money that you could have spent with it. So any of these types of things are intrinsic investments. Kind of have you kind of spent that energy kind of investing in the relationship. And quite surprisingly, we find that extrinsic, we have children potentially extrinsic. Anything that's outside of it, something like a house or a kind of large purchase like a car. So it's not meant to be overly complicated. It's just simply saying that if we have, for example, here it says if we have satisfaction is high, alternatives are low, then we are obviously going to be more likely to stay in the relationship or be committed. But of course, if your satisfaction is low and your alternatives are high, of course, then you might be less committed. And that's kind of a simple kind of idea in terms of the relationship. So it also says that that you can use these relationship maintenance mechanisms, which will pretty much help you to become even more committed. So it says here, these are behaviors which only couples who are committed to the relationship will kind of show. So for example, you're never going to have perfect kind of satisfaction, or even kind of, you might consider alternatives. But of course, if you can show things like forgiveness, willingness to sacrifice, you potentially could find that your commitment kind of ends up being kind of higher, especially if you consider some of the kind of intrinsic kind of investment you might have within a relationship. So there's nothing kind of groundbreaking in terms of this. We have to be able to describe it and be able to talk about exactly kind of where these particular features lie. Of course, we need to be able to evaluate it as well. And there does seem to be research support for this. Most research do seem to kind of indicate to us that if you do have high levels of satisfaction or kind of low comparative alternatives, then of course these are strong indicators that you're going to be committed to a relationship if you kind of add that to investment. And this is not just a single study that kind of tells us this. It's a meta-analysis done looking at 52 studies. So pretty much it seems that, and I suppose it's fairly logical that if you kind of have high levels of satisfaction coupled with kind of low alternatives, or even kind of not kind of wanting to seek alternatives with high investment, you're obviously going to be committed. So, and of course, other kind of obvious things, that the more committed you are, the more stable you are as well. And of course, it's amazing to see this across cultures and genders, and actually quite nice to kind of see relationships that include homosexual relationships are also included in this particular meta-analysis. So pretty much people are kind of happy with the investment model, so much so that actually it has been used in kind of various fields, and one of the fields that potentially it does get used, and which I'm not always particularly comfortable with, because having worked a bit for Lifeline and Rape Crisis, I do kind of know the kind of difficulty of domestic violence, but you can also use this model to kind of explain certain types of behaviors. So, of course, you know, if there's a lot of evidence there, it says it's potentially that this commitment model is kind of universal in romantic relationships. I suppose it makes perfect sense. Okay, this is just that application I was talking about specifically intimate partner violence, and it says here this model has been used to explain why some women stay in these particular relationships. And of course, all I'm doing is taking an understanding of those three dynamics, then potentially kind of working out a level of commitment, and then kind of explaining kind of the behavior. So we see here in 1995, they say that if you have high investment with low alternatives, okay, that you may well stay in a relationship despite satisfactions being very low. Okay, obviously, you know, if you're in an intimate partner violent relationship, you're not going to be particularly happy. But of course, there's that high investment. You have children. You perhaps don't. You know, you have other things that you potentially could say about the investment. But I suppose the main thing is the alternatives are low. You don't have anywhere else to live, or you perhaps don't have money of course you're going to stay with that relationship according to the investment model. And this is commonly accepted, and people do accept this as an exam argument, an exam point, though of course I would like you to be sensitive to kind of the audience of who's kind of marking this, and consider that maybe this explanation could be reductionist or certainly deterministic as well. So I use the phrase there, deterministic. I do feel that it could be reductionist. I think that's a kind of, let's do reductionist, because I think that's an important thing for us to also acknowledge as well, that it could be reductionist. I spelled that wrong. So let me go and explain this in terms of kind of what I think it could be. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to kind of perhaps take out deterministic and put reductionist into it, because what I'm going to say is that intimate partner violence or abusive relationships are quite complex. It's often the removal of it's fear removal of options. Can you imagine being in a relationship where you don't even have a key to your own home? You're certainly not going to be able to leave very easily and come back, or any of those types of things. So it could be those types of things. It could be other factors like factors affecting attraction, kind of other things that may well explain kind of why people stay within relationships. And I do feel that just simply saying it's down to kind of lack of alternatives or high investment is reducing the realities of abusive relationships to something a little bit too simple. But we also find that there are other weaknesses as well. It says it oversimplifies investment. This is not the easiest of points, but we need to talk about other kind of factors that you might meet. Certainly you might get to a particular stage in your life where you're looking at kind of maybe having a family yourself, or you're looking at kind of the reduced options you may have. And we see even just things like this in early stages of a romantic relationship, you don't have much investment, but you might be thinking about other things like this. It says future plans. Certainly meeting somebody and potentially considering where this relationship could go. So it says, therefore, romantic partners are committed to each other because they want to seek their plans for future to work out. Certainly, if you're a divorcee and you perhaps meet somebody else, you perhaps have been through quite a few different experiences. You may not necessarily consider a kind of immediate kind of investment straight away, but you could consider future plans in terms of where you'd like it to be. And so it says Rustbelt does not take into account future plans and therefore is an incomplete description. It kind of talks about kind of things in the present rather than considering where relationships go. So not exactly a great deal of kind of content there in terms of the evaluation points. Obviously consider things like the cultural relevance of it, whether this can be applied across all cultures, whether people perhaps have different kind of views in terms of kind of the role people play, perhaps in terms of gender, also the power dynamics of patriarchy, things like that. So I think there's more to this. I just kind of highlighted these particular points for you, and certainly I hope that it's been good for you. That's it for this particular investment model, and I hope to kind of speak to you soon to go through the last one, which is about romantic relationship breakdown. Thank you. Okay, bye.